What's up, YouTube? It's Joe Catchpolia sitting on the couch making some money investing in fractional real estate online as usual. Today, I want to talk a little bit about why we might want to invest in deals with interest only loans, talk about lazy equity, some sort of, try to clarify a few, um, sort of finance type terms that got thrown around on the Mogul webinar today, if any of you saw that. By the way, I'm sure many of you are new here. I noticed a lot of people on my channel, a lot of new people tuned in for the interview I did with Earl, who's an investor on Lofty and one of the co-owners of several properties on there. You might not know that what my channel in general is about. I'm just talking about fractional real estate investing in general. I've been an investor for close to 20 years now. I've been into this space, this fractional real estate investing, for much shorter, just about 6 months, but I've been experimenting pretty heavily in a number of different platforms. I'm just trying to share anytime I can use my real estate knowledge or experience and share a little bit about, a little bit of insight onto any of the platforms. I'm trying to do that as I figure out some stuff in real time. Sometimes I'm messing stuff up. Really working on building a community here. A lot of people have connected with me, reached out. Just recently created Fractional Real Estate Investors Discord. You can see so far, we only have a few members. It's just trying to build a little bit of a community where we can talk off of all of the other platforms, Discords, and just have sort of some discussions about fractional real estate investing in general. Also, maybe talk some smack about the platforms when you don't want to do that on their own Discord channels. So that's the main idea behind that. If you want to sign up, there's a link in the description of this video. You don't have to do that. I respond to comments on here. Many of you have sent me emails. However you want to talk about it, I'm just want to. I think this is really the future of real estate. I think there's going to be. Uh, I'd like to help shape where it's going. I think there's a lot of platforms that are doing great, and there's a lot of them that are doing not. There's already some that are clearly failing, and I think that the more we as investors can sort of assert ourselves as what we'd like to see on these platforms, especially the ones that are really new. I think there's some real possibility to make some change and to make it so it's a product that we really like. Um, and so I'm on Mogul right now. I don't know if you're not familiar with this platform. Any of the ones that I actually invest on, I put links in the description. There's a number of platforms I've decided not to. I've made videos about why that is. One thing I want to mention before I forget, please like and subscribe. But also, if you have experience on any of these platforms that is, something negative, you lost a bunch of money, you don't like how it works, especially if it's one that I'm not investing on because, I put money on and took it off Landa right away. I decided not to invest in Arrived at all. There's some platforms that I just decided weren't for me. And so if you have positive or negative experience with any of those, I'd be interested to talk to you. But if you have, particularly, a lot of times I spend a lot of time talking about Lofty. I'm very happy with the returns I'm making on there, but I know there's a lot of people that have gotten hurt, particularly people that have been on there for several years, because, especially the early batches of properties weren't great. But honestly, even, some of the stuff that's come out, even since they have their co-ownership model, has struggled. And so, um, I'm very, very much willing to, if somebody wanted to come on and talk to me, just like I did with Earl with his positive experience, I'd love to do that. Or if you just want to talk to me a little bit, share some things that maybe I've missed. I know there's some people that have real strong negative opinions on some platforms, and sometimes I don't really see it, and so I want to understand that. So anyway, what I want to get to though is a lot of these platforms are putting out sort of quasi educational information, but they're mostly doing as a means to sell their product. I was on Moguls today. They did a webinar, and they actually they're true finance guys and with real estate experience, and so I feel like they really speak my language. But to a certain extent, I think some of the things they say I think they just kind of gloss over some stuff that is sort of, we could think a little bit more deeply about, or maybe think in pictures. And so that's what I want to do today is talk a little bit about, what they were talking about on there. You don't have to have watched it for it to make sense, but I brought this up because I want to encourage you. If you're investing on Mogul, you should definitely tune into their webinars, even if you're just signed up on there and haven't invested yet. They almost always send out some incentive afterwards, and sometimes it's quite a big chunk, like you have to buy $5,000 of a property. That's what they did this time. If you buy 5,000, you can get an additional 250 in a different property. I took advantage of that one time. It's a right off the bat, you're just a little 5% return. It's not too bad. They're also, you don't even have to do that. Anything you invest on there, I think they're doing this up to 10K investment protection. That's a little bit gimmicky. They're like, if you lose money on one of these in the first year, we'll cover up to 10K of it. But they do this if they do a lot of these different little incentives. Um, some of it, I mean, I have a small portfolio on there, but it's made a good return, and a big chunk of it is just from, the things that they're doing like that, and they're doing it because they're new, and they're trying to attract investors, and so I don't think it'll last forever. But they really give some good insight, and they'll answer any question that you put in their chat on those. They'll also actually schedule a call with you to talk one-on-one. So I'd encourage people to do that if you're investing on that site. Also, if you're on ground floor, definitely always listen to these. They send out these like podcasts or whatever. But I think the more educated we can all be on the different products on the platforms we're investing in, it's super useful going forward. But all that being said, I really just what they talked about today. So Mogul's using interest only loans on I think all of their deals. I don't know if all their past ones that's true, but all deals, at least going forward, it sounds like they're going to want to do interest only loans. And so somebody had asked them, well, so we're not getting any amortization. And if you remember, the four benefits that people think about when you think about investing in real estate, you've got your cash flow, you have your equity pay down, you have your appreciation, and you have your tax benefits. Well, if you're using an interest only loan, there's zero equity pay down, right? So you're losing that benefit, and you'd be like, well, why would we want to do that? Um, and so that's what I want to get into, because I think from a finance perspective, they're right. From a When you start to think about risk adjusted returns, maybe they're not. And so what are they talking about? So, okay, on a regular loan, so we have some assumptions here. We're buying a 10 cap, and our debt is 10% interest or 8% interest, okay? And it's interest only. I'm going to do the calculation either way as if it were interest only, just to kind of keep this super simple. But so let's say you buy the deal. It's 30% equity, 70% debt. With these two numbers, your 10 cap and 8% debt, you end up making 14.67% return on equity. But if you over time, if your 10 cap doesn't change, you have no, there's no changes in the income, and there's no changes in the interest rate. But because if you weren't using interest only, so you've paid down your debt, you end up having a 60-40 split. And with these same numbers, that dilutes you down to a 13% return on equity, because any dollars that you spend paying down debt only get an 8% return, but your deal that you invested in initially was a 10% return, right? And so that's why they're saying, well, we're just never going to pay down debt. We're going to, use the interest only loan. And so because they don't want to, as long as they have, and they use the word accretive debt, and that's, industry term that maybe not everybody throws around, but usually all that means is that um, by using that debt, it's increasing your cash flow or increasing your return. And the reason that would be because your if either your interest rate or your debt constant, if it's an amortizing loan, is lower than your cap rate, and that's what's going to make it accretive. And so that just means that it'll increase your return on equity versus decrease it. Um, and so the opposite would be true. Let's say if you're buying, and this is why there's a lot of people having a hard time making deals work, is because debt is expensive, and if you have a cap rate that's below the current interest rate, you can't even make it work with an interest only loan, let alone if you're paying down debt. But so I want to just do a little bit of math, and so so you don't have to take my word for this. I just want to show you what I'm doing here. It's really simple numbers. So you make $100 investment, and now I flip these because I think it is easier to think about as trickling down the income, right? So now we have $70 in debt, $30 in equity. So it's a 70% LTV. And so if it's a 10 cap, that means each year we have $10 in income for that $100 in debt, right? And so, or that $100 investment, that's the total investment, 70 in debt, 30 in equity. And so with an 8% interest rate on the $70, you end up paying $5.60 in your interest. And then so you take your $10, you subtract that interest, and that's what you've got left over, right? Your $4.40. That's your cash flow. But to get your return on equity, you compare that cash flow, you divide it by the amount that you put in an equity. And that's how we get to this number here. Now we do the same thing, and I actually just have it flowing through, but I wanted to be able to let you look at both at the same time. And so if we do the same thing, but we change the LTV to 60/40, you have a $100 investment total, but now only 60 is in debt, 40 is in equity. But the same thing, right? So now we're paying less interest because we paid down some debt. So a lot of people focus on this, right? You're thinking like, okay, I was paying $5.60. Now I'm only paying $4.80. So I saved 80 cents in interest, right? But what flows down now is $5.20. But now we have to divide that by $40 because that's the equity we now have in the property because we paid down an additional $10 over time. And so that when you divide that, you end up with a 13% return on equity, which is lower, right? And so as your mortgage continues to get paid down with amortization, your return on equity goes lower and lower. And once it's completely paid off, then it's just equal to whatever your cap rate is. So this would go all the way down to 10%. So that's what they're talking about when, they don't want to do that, right? And so I just broke this out to sort of see this a little differently. The difference between the equity, so the $40 in equity and $30 in equity, that's just $10, right? The difference between the payment and the debt here and the payment and the debt here, that's 80 cents. You take your 80 cents and you divide it by the $10. That's your 8% ROE, right? Your 8%. It's not really. This is the return on that $10 that you pay down, and it's 8% because that's what your interest rate is, right? And so that's the argument for not if you for using an interest only loan, for not paying down your mortgage, and to try to avoid having lazy equity, right? They didn't use that term, but that's my favorite way to describe it. And it really becomes apparent. You also end up having this happens here and reduces your return on equity, but at the same time you may have some appreciation, right? And then that exacerbates this issue because if the property had also appreciated $10, then you have $40 that you're dividing this by again versus just the 30. And so they're picking markets that they expect to get appreciation in. And so you're already eventually going to end up with some lazy equity, right? If they're right. And so to avoid having too much and really kind of muting the returns, they're using that interest only structure. Now, in addition to that, so where does that extra money go, right? Like when they're doing this, so that instead of that $10 getting paid down against the principal over time, that's just extra cash flow that's coming to us as investors. And so the only way that it really makes sense as an investor for us to do that is if we can then turn around and reinvest that cash at a higher rate than the 8%. Well, their deals, they're already giving you these higher returns, right? And this is just your cash on cash return that we're talking about, right? This isn't considering your appreciation in a sale, right? This is just all we did is look at income, relative to our equity. Sorry about that. I just had this freeze. So all I was saying is, all we're looking at is our income relative to our equity to see what that cash on cash return is basically. And so if their other investments are going to be yielding higher than that 8% interest, then it makes sense to, instead of paying down that debt, take that cash and invest it elsewhere. And so that's why they're saying let's just stick with interest only loans. One, it increases your cash on cash returns early on, so it makes their deals look a little bit more attractive. And I think that's part of it, and that's the part they didn't say out loud. But at the same time, it makes sense from a finance standpoint because I want to, if I'm going to maximize my returns, if I can get a 14% return on equity, why am I going to use extra cash to pay down interest at 8%? The thing though that the reason you might want to do it though is this isn't thinking about risk adjusted returns, right? So when I pay down debt, I only get whatever the interest rate is, that's my return. But it is a guaranteed return, right? I am wiping out the obligation to pay that 8%. And there is uh, there's no risk in that, in say you know 100% you saved that 8% on the amount that you paid down, where on the other side, the higher return that we're getting on the properties, and in that where you'd reinvest it, excuse me, might have a high enough risk profile that you think the best case scenario on a risk adjusted basis is to pay down the 8% interest. um, Now, I don't think that that's for me personally, I don't think that that's the case in the deals that I'm going to invest in, right? I mean, one of the things that we're spending a lot of time on this channel doing is doing due diligence on the properties that we see on the different platforms. And so, if I thought that, it was a high enough risk that I'm crushing a return, to that extent, um, then I just wouldn't be doing it, right? Like, and so this is sort of the same discussion we have about when I talk about investing on ground floor, right? I'm expecting a lower return on there than I am on the rest of my fractional real estate investing, but it's because it's a debt instrument. It's not exactly the same because there is some risk to that, right? But it is, I think it's still a decent risk adjusted return. Just like always, though, just because I invest in any of these things or I think they're a good deal does not mean that they're a good deal for you. You want to do your own due diligence. Uh, I probably didn't say that enough yet today, but basically we're just talking in general concepts. But the same thing for any of the links that I have in the description, just because I've decided to invest on those platforms doesn't mean that I'm right and that those are the good ones, right? You want to really do your due diligence on the platforms and on the deals on there and figure out, are they a good fit for you, right? Like, so I've decided I like ground floor a lot for um, a certain, not the best yield, but a good yield, and what I think will be a relatively low risk going forward. And but then I spent a lot of time on Lofty buying some um, really what I consider very risky properties, but only doing it because I'm getting incredible discounts to their real world price with some of the discounted tokens. And then on Mogul, the ones that I have on here so far, great. Logged out, but yeah, you won't be able to see it. Okay, well, there we go. The ones that I have on here so far are let's see, let's go back to the properties. Um, I think that they have their overall. Oh yeah, let me show you their analysis tab. I think their overall, like this is one that was my first real purchase on here. So far, it's actually having a good yield because it's sold out a month or so ago and it has already started paying off, but it has good cash on cash return, and I believe in this annualized IRR because it's I think they got a good deal on it and whatnot, and so. But again, just because I think that doesn't mean that this is going to actually make money, right? Um, but so obviously, or maybe not obviously, but buying a short-term rental and it's the property and equity position in a short-term rental, in general, I'd expect that to have a much higher risk profile than buying a first mortgage on a single-family home, even though that's being used as a fix and flip loan. I mean, that's what muddies the water a little bit, is because the ground floor loans are for fix and flip. But in general, I think that it's a very different risk profile, especially when you look at the ability to get really wide diversification on the ground floor platform. So that's why I'm putting some money in each, right? And I'm also trying to get some diversification across platforms because I don't necessarily trust that all of these different ones are going to make it in the long run, right? And so I'm trying to put some money, spread it out. But that's really, I've now gone off on too far of a tangent. This was really all I wanted to get into. They had that discussion about, it's a creative debt and why are we using interest only? And I feel like they said everything that I just said, but they did it quickly and maybe for me thinking in pictures is just a lot easier thinking in pictures and spreadsheets, right? And so being able to actually see how that calculation works out on a very simple level, I thought that might be helpful. That's really all I've got for today. If if you are looking down, any of these rabbit holes with different sites that are giving you some of this education, and you run into some of these things that maybe they say, and it's like, well, why is that the case? I'm happy to talk about it. Not necessarily that I'm going to know it, but I've spent a lot of time in the industry early on, very heavily on the finance side of deals, working on the commercial finance side of real estate investing. And so, even though this isn't the stuff that we're usually doing when we're doing our due diligence, it's stuff that I'm pretty comfortable digging into and talking a little bit more about if it's helpful. Um, yeah, I think that's it for today. So until next time, I am going to keep making mistakes so that you don't have to.